2016. Robin, if you could please take the roll.
Commissioner Alcheck. Commissioner Downing. Chair Fine.
Present.
Vice Chair Gardias.
Present.
Commissioner Rosenblum.
Present.
Commissioner Tanaka. Commissioner Waldvogel. 6 present.
Thank you so much. I'd like to open it up for oral communications. Do we have any cards from members of the public who wish to speak on items not on the agenda? No cards? Great. Any agenda changes? None? Okay. Assistant Director Late, what's your report?
Thank you. I just wanted to transmit the meeting schedule, which is included in tab 1 of your packet, and also to let you know just briefly that the City Council this week approved some amendments to our fee schedule, so we're going to adjust our planning fees to reflect the level of work effort that is involved in that. And prior to that, a week prior to that, there was a discussion about housing that Director Gittleman will be discussing when she talks to you about item number 3 on your packet.
Thank you so much. So the Assistant Director called attention to 2 new documents that you might have gotten with our packet. And it's an effort in order to rework our agendas and also give us a little more visibility into what's happening in the future. So you'll notice that there's future tentative agenda schedule as well as a schedule of commission representation to the council. And then on this sheet, it's the meeting schedule and assignments. I was hoping we could go over maybe the next 6 weeks or so. We've had a couple absences recently which really have messed up our calendar or pushed items a bit too far down the road rather than we would like. So I'm just wondering if anybody is going to miss either of any of the April or May meetings, and if we know that in advance, let's just get that out there so staff knows. I will be missing at least the meeting of April 13th, potentially the 27th in April. Any other people know plans in advance?
Yes, I will be missing the meeting of May 25th and May 11th.
Yeah, I think people are just checking their calendars.
It's two days, May 11th and May 25th.
Okay, Commissioner Olczyk may be out on the 11th. Potential.
Is that May, Commissioner? Thank you.
Okay.
If you can speak into your microphone. Thank you.
June 29th. I'll be out of the country.
I'm likely to be out on June 8th.
And as we get closer to these dates, I know we can't all go so far ahead in the future, but let's try to keep a month or 2 notice in advance so we have an idea of what's happening. And so maybe again in a month, we'll just do this again and see if anybody else has another conflict. All right, thank you all so much. Let's move on to the action items.
Excuse me, Chair.
Sure.
So the other change that we made on that sheet was we've identified backups and primaries for the rest of the year on the council representation. I just didn't know if there was any comments on that.
Thank you very much. Yeah. So Assistant Director Late is indicating that at the bottom there's the primary and backup representatives to council meetings. If you know you have an issue with one of these, I think the best option is probably just contact your counterpart there. If both of you have an issue, please just write me and we'll work with staff to get some other folks to go. This month, it's Commissioner or Vice Chair Gardias and Commissioner Olczyk. If no other comments or questions, let's move on to our study sessions. So we have 3 study sessions tonight, and the first is our National Citizen Survey results. So this is a survey the city's done for a couple of years now. There's some really great data in here. As a few of us really liked last year, this is also available in Tableau online, so you can kind of pivot and change the data as you like. I kind of find this useful, at least I hold on to this, and when an issue comes up in a neighborhood, it might be helpful just to get some grounding, to go look at this data and see what that neighborhood's been thinking in the past year. So with that, I believe we'll turn it over to staff.
Great, thank you. And I'll just introduce Harriet Richardson, who is the city auditor, and she was here last year to present the report, and she's graciously agreed to do this again. So thank you, Harriet.
Okay, so good evening, Harriet Richardson, City Auditor. Can someone who's a little closer to the screen tell me which, I can't, even with my glasses on, I can't see which one I need to click on there. You just do that, okay. Yeah, I was trying to get the whole other thing out. Okay, thank you. Getting new glasses this weekend, that'll help. Okay, so I am here tonight to present the results of the 2015 National Citizen Survey. Last year I presented the results of the 2014 National Citizen Survey. This is actually the 13th year that we've conducted the survey. We contract with the National Research Center, which does the survey in collaboration with the International City and County Management Association, commonly referred to as ICMA. And the purpose of the survey is to gather opinions from residents around a range of community issues regarding service levels, quality of life in Palo Alto, those types of things. So last year, we increased the number of surveys distributed from 1,200 to 3,000. We did that again this year. And one of the primary reasons we did that was to try to increase the number of responses we get back. Our response rate has been steadily decreasing over the years. So 25% response rate, even though we got 721 surveys, which is higher than earlier years before when we were issuing only 1,200 surveys. It's the lowest response rate that we've had over time. And last year we tried a variety of marketing efforts. We contacted the neighborhood groups directly. We put some information out on Nextdoor, and we put a press release out, but it didn't seem to increase the number of surveys. So we'll talk about this year about if there's a way to increase that response rate. So you should each have a copy of the survey in front of you, and periodically I'll refer to some pages in there if it helps you go along with what I'm referring to. So the survey responses are weighted to reflect the community population, and what that does is it means that, for example, if the population is 49% female, 50% male, and 52% females respond, and 48% males respond. They'll weight that to balance what the demographics of the population actually are. And they do that, so it doesn't change the total number of responses, it just gives a different weight to the responses based on the factors that they use to consider the weighting. And if you look on page 7 of the citizen survey report, you'll see a table there which actually shows the different categories that they weight and the population categories that they use to weight those. So they weight it overall. They weight it overall by the number of responses received, and then they also do it by the North and South and the 6 area groups that we divide the city into to get different kinds of responses, to understand how different neighborhoods respond to the questions that we ask. And on this next slide, you can actually see what those breakdowns are. So overall, as I said, we had 3,000 surveys. We just received 721 back. That's a 25% response rate when you deduct the undeliverable responses or surveys. So the post office sends back to us any that are undeliverable. We get that count to the National Research Center. They deduct it from the 3,000 as well as from the number that came back from each of the sub-areas, north or south, or the 6 geographic subgroups. And then they calculate the response rate based on the number of eligible responses. They also calculate a margin of error based on each of those groups. So overall, the survey has a margin of error of plus or minus 4%, which means that if this survey were conducted again, most of the responses are going to fall either 4 percentage points above or below. They'll fall within that range, and that's just a normal response rate that you would expect. Anything outside of that rate probably reflects a shift in perception by residents. The North and South has because it's a fewer surveys distributed in each area, has a lower or a higher margin of error of 5%. And then as you get into the much smaller geographic subgroups, the margin of error increases to plus or minus 11%. And if you look at pages 4 and 5 of the survey handout, the booklet that you have there, you'll see the neighborhoods that are in the North and South, which is separated by Oregon Expressway, and then the 6 neighborhood groups. And we use the same 6 neighborhoods as last year, so that hopefully over time we can start doing some benchmark comparisons to see if there's any changes in perception and opinion over time by neighborhood group. But right now we only have 2 years, so you can't really make that much of a correlation from one year to the next. So there's a standard report format for the questions, and these are the standard questions that are in the survey, not the customized questions. And these actually begin on page 10 of the report. So there's 5 different sets of tables for each of these questions. The first one is just the overall response. How many people responded to each question and what their responses were. The next table is the same except that it excludes don't know responses when don't know was an option. And the purpose of that is because it gives a more realistic expression of people's opinions, because it calculates the responses based on only those who had an opinion. So it actually is a better measure of response. Then there's a table for historical results. We have 10 years of data going back to 2006. And then the geographic subgroups, which are the North and South and those 6 area groups. And then the benchmark comparisons. So the benchmark comparisons, one thing that's helpful to understand with that is that in the back of the book, beginning on page 64, it lists all the cities and counties that they use to participate as used for benchmark comparisons. But you won't see that many in most of these benchmark comparison numbers where they show how many jurisdictions were in the benchmark, the number of communities that were compared to. The reason for that is the National Research Center collects data from other sources. So they might use the American Community Survey. They might use, for example, the city of Portland is in here. They do their own survey. They've never contracted it out. And they gather that information and they put it all in a database. They track it regularly, so they keep it pretty fresh. All the cities that are and counties that are in that list have done a survey within the past 5 years. But if there's a comparison, it reflects the most recent survey if there's been more than one. So you'll see another thing in the benchmark comparisons where it says how we compare. They use 5 different categories. One is similar, which generally means we're within plus or minus 5% of the benchmark cities. And I say generally because they use some statistical algorithms that will calculate if we're out of the range. And so it might be, you'll see one that's within 5%, but it might show a different benchmark than similar. Lower or higher means it's generally within plus or minus 6 to 10% of the benchmark cities and counties, and much higher or lower means it's generally plus or minus more than 10% difference than the benchmark cities and counties. So there's some general questions that actually the first question that begins on page 10 that the National Research Center survey asks regarding general livability. And these are questions that pertain to the particular jurisdiction. So the first one up there that you see is quality of life. And in general, as I go through these questions and talk about the surveys, the responses, I'm going to be talking about the overall. I've presented here for you the north, south, and the different areas, but just for sake of not droning on for too long, I'm really just talking mostly about the overall, although I will point out some things that stand out in the other areas. So for quality of life, with an overall rating of 88%, this is actually the first year that the Palo Alto has rated less than 90%. The range has generally been 91 to 94% during those 10 years. And if you notice, Area 4 is down at 81%, and looking down the line for these livability questions, Area 4 tended to rate questions throughout the survey lower than other areas. Area 6 and Area 3 tended to rate higher. Palo Alto is a place to live. We were 92%, which is similar to other jurisdictions, and it's actually tied as the lowest year with 2013, which also rated 92%. And the range has been pretty narrow on this question. It's generally been 92 to 94%. But there again, you see Area 4 very low, 86, compared to the other areas of the city. Your neighborhood as a place to live, rated at 90%, and we had 3 other years that rated as 90%, and the range has only been 90 to 92, so we're pretty consistent. People tend to like their neighborhood as a place to live. You'll see less variance there than you see in Palo Alto overall as a place to live. Palo Alto is a place to raise children. Again, this is the first year that has fallen below 90%. We rated 87%. The range has generally been 90 to 94%. Again, you see Area 4 way down at 79, but you see Area 3 up at 94. And quality of services at 85% is well within the range. It's ranged from 80 to 88% over the 10 years. So we're pretty consistent. It's fluctuated up and down, but has been pretty consistent within that range. So the National Research Center categorizes the questions into 8 facets, which are shown on this list. Last year, they presented the report by those facets, but what happened when you did that, you had to jump throughout the report to find questions that were similarly rated or similar in topic. And so this year, we asked them, can you just leave the questions in the order of the survey? We felt that it was easier to follow when people are looking at the survey, to follow the results in the report than to be jumping all over throughout the report trying to find where is this question. So I think it worked better. We have a spreadsheet that shows which questions go into each facet, but I will be discussing natural environment, built environment, and mobility, which tend to pertain more to the Planning and Transportation Commission in more detail. So overall, mobility rates the lowest, only 57%, and built environment rates low at 63%. That was the second lowest. Economy and community engagement were both less than 70%. Overall, when you look at all the questions by facet, the ratings aren't particularly high. When you look at the ones in the 80% range, you know, if you translated that to an A, B, C, D, E scale, that's a B. Nothing in the 90% or higher rating, overall rating, although individual questions may have rated higher or lower than what you see here. These particular questions are based on, although the individual questions throughout the survey ask specific questions about people's perception of the quality in the form of excellent, good, or fair or poor, or they don't know. The overall FACET questions are asked in the context of how important is it to you that Palo Alto focus on these issues, and whether or not you rate them excellent or good. So there's an overall question for each of these also, which still, you'll see a correlation there, because built environment and mobility rate low as overall quality of service. You see them as higher rating on the essential or very important for the city to focus on improving those areas. So talking about the built environment, so for each of these next few slides, what I've done is I've presented this year's results, last year's results, so you can see there if there's a change from last year to this year, and then went back to the 10 years to 2006 and did a comparison so you can see if there's much of a change over the 10 years. In some instances, the question wasn't asked way back as far as 2010. In those cases, if it's been prior to 2014, I put the most recent year in there, but in 2014, they did redesign some of the questions, and so there may be no comparison other than 2014. So that's what you see on this slide. So looking at quality, overall quality of the built design, that takes into consideration just what do you think of how things look. And that tends to rate low this year. However, although it's low, there are no benchmarks for me to say how it compares to other jurisdictions. I didn't provide the benchmark comparisons on the slide simply because it would be too crowded, and I didn't want to carry a lot of information over to multiple slides, but as I go through these, I'll tell you how they compare to the benchmarks. And in this particular question, there was no benchmark comparison. This question was not asked until 2014, so again, there's no older comparison just for Palo Alto either. Overall appearance for Palo Alto stayed the same from last year to this year. Over time, it's increased about 4 percentage points, which means it's generally not changed. It's within the margin of error for what you'd expect on the response rate. Public places where people want to spend time didn't change from last year to this year, 81%. The average for the benchmark cities, though, is only 67%, so we're looking pretty good there, even though we might like a higher rating. Variety of housing options, we rate only 20% there. This is an area that has been consistently discussed as an area of concern in the city, and the survey reflects those results. And it's also gone down. So last year, the responses said 27% thought that variety of housing options were excellent or good. Back in 2006 or 2008, it was 34%. So it's never been great, but it's consistently gone down. The average benchmark city is still pretty low too. It's 25%. So we're close to those benchmarks, even though it's not great in Palo Alto either. And availability of affordable quality housing, we only rate 8%. Last year it was 11%, which is pretty consistent with what it's been over time. And again, even though those ratings are low, when you compare to the benchmark cities and counties, they rate them low too. The average is only 10%, so we're not doing as bad compared to other cities. It's just that everyone views their availability of affordable quality housing as not very high. Shopping opportunities, this year we rated 79%. It was down 3 percentage points from last year, but it's been within a consistent range, 79 to 80% there. And the average for benchmarks is 71%, so we're actually doing better than the benchmark comparisons. I know there's been a lot of discussion about loss of retail, but the survey doesn't seem to reflect that, and it didn't last year either. So continuing with the built environment, there's actually quite a few questions in the survey about the built environment. So there's a question about how vibrant are the downtown and commercial areas, and we rate in the mid to upper 70s. That question was not asked until 2014, so there's not a lot of comparison, but we're higher than benchmark cities and counties, which only rated at 67%. Quality of new development, 49%. Again, it may seem low, but the average of benchmarks is 47%. So even though there's a lot of complaints about new development and the amount of effort that goes into making it appealing to residents, it's not much different from what you see in those nearly 500 other communities that are responding to surveys. However, it has declined over time. In 2006, residents thought it was 62% of the residents thought the quality of new development was excellent or good. Street repair, this was an interesting one because street repair went down from 55% to 51%, but yet we've been working hard on increasing our pavement condition index, and it has increased. We're currently the second highest in the Metropolitan Transportation Commission's area that they track the PCI for. So this is an area that maybe residents aren't noticing when it wasn't, because it wasn't their street that got repaired. It's hard to say for sure, but that's likely what the issue is there. Sidewalk maintenance has stayed the same, 62%. We have gone up. The average in 2006 of rating excellent or good was 53%. Compared to benchmark jurisdictions, it was 56%. Land use planning and zoning. Again, this is another area where we hear a lot of concerns from residents, and the survey shows that at 40%, down 3% from 2014 and down 10% from 2006. However, we are still very comparable with other jurisdictions, which rated an average of 42% of respondents rated it excellent or good. So it seems to be a general concern of all communities about their land use and planning. Code enforcement went down 3 percentage points. It's only gone down 2 over time, so it's been fairly consistent. We're slightly higher than the benchmark jurisdictions, which rated it at 54%. And economic development, which although 69% may not seem high, the benchmark comparisons were 62%. And we did go down 4 percentage points from last year, and 8 percentage points, or up 8 percentage points. That says minus 8%, that should say plus in that last column. We're up 8 percentage points from 2006, so we're doing better there than what residents thought we were doing in the past. So moving on to the natural environment, looking at overall quality, 86% of residents feel that the quality of the natural environment is excellent or good. That stayed fairly consistent over time. The first question was first asked in 2008, not 2006, so I put a footnote on that. There aren't any benchmark comparisons for that particular question. Air quality, we're actually much higher than benchmark cities, so at 81%, we've been fairly consistent on that one. Benchmark comparisons were 69% rating as excellent or good. City parks have consistently had high ratings, and they have gone up higher over time. We're much higher than benchmark cities, which rate their parks only at an average of 80% of the benchmark cities rate their parks as excellent or good. And preservation of natural and open space, 77% for Palo Alto, higher than benchmark comparisons at 69%. We've been fairly consistent in the high 70s to 80% range over time. Palo Alto open space, we again rate higher than other jurisdictions at 84%. The other jurisdictions only rate their open space at 73%, so we're doing much better there. That question was first asked in 2014, so there's no older data to compare with. And then overall, so two different questions that are asked. One is city parks, another one is your neighborhood park. So it gives people an opportunity, focused in a little bit more on the parks they generally visit. They rate their neighborhood parks slightly lower than overall city parks, but again, still give them higher ratings. And street tree maintenance, the rating has went down 7% from last year. It's not clear why. People think it was lower. I don't know, maybe the drought contributed to that, but it's hard to say for sure why people thought it was much lower this year. It's important to recognize that the survey asks the people what they think, but it doesn't ask them why they think that. So we can't really draw a lot of conclusions about their thoughts based on that. And then moving on to mobility, this is the area that had the lowest ratings throughout the survey, other than housing. So overall ease of getting to places where you usually visit, 65% of the residents rated it as excellent or good, compared to 71% last year, so they view that as getting worse. In every instance, mobility rated lower this year than it did last year, and it's consistently gone down from 2006. Rather than going through each of these, I just want to make that general comment. If you look at the row that says availability of paths and walking trails, I made an error in that last column. Instead of putting the difference, I repeated what 2004 was, so that should just be -1% in that last column. But overall, again, you're looking at ease of travel by public transportation as the lowest, ease of walking as the highest, and you'll see that also reflected in some questions, custom questions that we asked this year, which I'll get to in a couple of slides. So each year we ask departments and council members if there's anything specific on their mind that they would like us to ask residents in our survey. This year, Planning, Community and Environment submitted several questions, and we also had one council member who submitted some questions that were consistent with some of these questions also, although we tweaked some of the questions to get them a little bit more in line with each other. And the National Research Center also works with us on these questions to make sure they're going to get us the type of responses we're trying to get out of them, since their specialty is knowing how to frame the questions. So one of the questions was, how frequently, if at all, do you shop in your neighborhood, in other parts of Palo Alto, in neighboring cities, or online? So the responses show that the majority of residents shop in their neighborhood 54% of the time, or other parts of Palo Alto 51% of the time, at least 1 to 5 times per week. And about 1/3 of them shop in those areas 1 to 3 times a month. So that's pretty good. We're doing a pretty good job of keeping people in Palo Alto to do their shopping, and that's fairly consistent with the question in the survey, the general question in the survey that asks about the availability of shopping opportunities. So while you do see them going out of the area, we are doing a pretty good job of keeping them in Palo Alto also. And then we also asked the same question, but for how often people go out to eat. And again, people tend to stay in Palo Alto, either in their own neighborhood or other parts of Palo Alto, quite a bit. About 1/3 of the people eat in their neighborhood in restaurants or other parts of Palo Alto 1 to 5 times a week, and about half of them eat in Palo Alto or other parts of Palo Alto 1 to 3 times a month. And there is a fairly high amount that go outside, actually higher, go outside at least 1 to 3 times a month, but given the high response rate in the other areas, they are probably staying in Palo Alto as well as going out. It's probably pretty much the same group of people. And there is a fairly high amount of people who shop online and order takeout. More than likely, that's a convenience issue, but it doesn't detract from what we're trying to do to keep people in Palo Alto and providing business support to businesses in Palo Alto. So planning also submitted 2 questions related to transportation. The first one is if you did not have access to a car for your usual daily transportation around town, how convenient, based on time and proximity, would you consider each of the following methods of getting around? So walking and biking were very high compared to all of the others. They were either very convenient or somewhat convenient to most residents. I don't know if some of you have heard Mayor Burt when he makes his comment about he bikes pretty much everywhere in the city, and he makes comments about how he would have driven, except that it takes him too long. So that his preference is biking. That's reflected, I think, in these responses by other residents also. And then Uber, Lyft, and rideshare services also rated pretty high for when, based on convenience. And compared to taxis or public transportation or the train, the free shuttle, those 3 modes of transportation rated quite a bit higher than the other opportunities. So the next question is when you say, when convenience is not an issue, how would you prefer to get around town? And again, you still see walking and biking as preferences, but the public transportation issues, options, bus, train, and the shuttle, almost double. Taxi drops almost in half. Uber, Lyft, and rideshare services drop almost in half, and carpooling almost doubles. So you definitely see different options as the preferred option based on whether it's convenient or not convenient at the time a person wants to travel around town or to some other area. So we also asked one open-ended question. Although this question was primarily related to parks, there were some things that I felt that when you look at the questions, they related, they did have relevance to the Planning and Transportation Commission. So I summarized those ones and then grouped everything else into another category. So people did identify parking and transportation as an issue for parks, getting to the parks, being able to park once you're in the park, those types of things. Wanting more green space in Palo Alto, and also the facilities, wanting improvements to the facilities. There was a high number that said we need more improvement to our better facilities, and then a very high number that compared to that said specifically we need bathrooms, we need restrooms in our parks, in every single park. And there were comments in where people wrote in that they felt that every park should have a bathroom or a restroom, and that sometimes they had to cut their visit shorter than they would have liked to because there wasn't a restroom available there. And then there's also an interest in having some dog off-leash dog areas. And then also wanting some improvements to bike and walking paths, which probably correlates to the question about convenience and how much you see people biking and walking around the city. And then all the other issues were more specific to parks, such as things as offering more classes and registering for classes. So when we're done with the survey and we've compiled all the results, we put the results on the city's open data website, and I've got a link right there. Even though it says 2003 to 2014 as the link, it is updated to include 2015. They just did not change the title of the link when they put that in there. And then last year I demonstrated to you the Tableau visualization software that we've put the responses in. We've updated that, so it now includes the results of about 6,700 surveys from 2003 to 2015. So in the presentation here and in the report, even though we only went back to 2006, starts getting to be too much to keep in a single report. When you go back further, we do have all of those results back from the beginning of the first survey that we did. And the nice thing about using Tableau is it lets you select different demographics to see how different groups of people responded to different questions. It's kind of a fun tool to play with. and just see, oh, how many males responded to this question versus females, or how many younger people responded to this question compared to, how did younger people respond compared to older people? And it can help you kind of focus in on what interests with different demographics and how you might think about that in the work that you do. And then I've got the link there where you can access that, that visualization. And again, it says 2014, but we did update it, so you can see it there. So that completes my presentation, and I can respond to any questions that you might have.
Well, thank you very much for that excellently detailed presentation. I'll just say personally and recommend to my fellow commissioners, check out the Tableau reports. It's a really nice way to kind of cross-cut the data and look at it across time. I believe we have one public speaker.
Mr. Nielsen Buchanan, you have 5 minutes, sir.
Good evening. I'm here to say how much I really support this questionnaire and survey process, and I have a few comments on how I hope we can all make it even better. I was lucky enough to get one of the little flyers this time, so I puzzled over it and finally just submitted my comments online to see how that worked. I think that a couple of things. The content of the questionnaire is really, really very good. You don't want to mess with it very much because you've got linear time frames to work with. At the same time, if it's static, it won't be improving over time. You probably have looked at the survey instrument itself. If you're not, I scanned it and I can send it to you. But it's worth going right back to the instrument as you puzzle through this. The biggest single weakness I saw was around housing affordability. I don't even like affordability as a term, but attainability. I gave the question to several people and just sort of asked them, how did you figure what your response was? And there was no rationale of what the cost of housing was to somebody, whether rent was included, taxes, condominium owners have a whole different cost structure. Those of us that own our properties outright tend to overlook a lot of stuff. So I think there's a whole set of questions that need to be more precise around something that is most elusive right now is what's affordability, what's attainability, and this is a chance to, in the next 2 or 3 years, to have some real solid data coming in. Security of the system alarms me a little bit, but I did discover that you can't copy the damn thing without making it look really ugly. So they've got some kind of secret paper that retards compromise. On the other hand, if you can hack an Apple phone, you can hack the online system. And Harriet and I had a little conversation about that's beyond my comprehension either, but my electronic gurus tell me you can hack it for sure. I'll leave it up to you. Looking around the room, I see one of our continued problems of engagement with the public. This is really important, and I don't think very many people or community groups really realize that. I don't know how to bridge that. If I were, I would talk longer. I think that maybe you've done this, but we've got the group that's working on the comp plan, just working hard, puzzling, fighting out stuff, opinions, relying on their own, and I think they too go out to the community and sort of asking what they think. I would encourage Harriet or someone to actually go about midstream catch, it's a medical term, and ask the members of the CAC what's information they're puzzling over. What would they like to know better? I assume they're reasonably familiar with the survey, but if there's anybody in town that's puzzling over what people think, it has to be this CAC. And I encourage that to be done. And finally, I'm glad to see the Planning Commission working on this. It's a real legitimate role for you to get out of the normal reviewing of projects, and which must be awfully tedious. I think some oversight functions are missing overall the council ought to be giving you. This is a good one that you could take stewardship over time to make this better and better and to help Harriet. So I'll just throw in another thing that I think oversight ought to be. I think the Planning Commission ought to have major oversight of the TMA. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'd like to open it up to, I think we can mix comments and questions. 5 minutes, Commissioner. Commissioner Rosenblum, I saw your light first.
Yeah, I agree. This is a really valuable tool. And since you introduced us to the Tableau interface last year, it's been kind of a go-to place for me, and so extremely useful. The custom questions, I think, would be really interesting to drill into. And I don't think those are available on the Tableau interface in the same respect. So for example, how often do you shop or eat? How often do you, or getting to my point here, I believe there's probably geographic differences in how often people use the local services, for example, how often they go out to shop or eat. Is that available somewhere as a geographic and demographic breakdown?
We have the raw data, and the reason we don't put those custom questions in Tableau is because they change every year.
Yep.
And we actually overloaded Tableau this
Yeah.
year and had to get a high-capacity computer to be able to process it. But it can't handle the capacity of all of those questions also. But we do have the raw data, and I can look into how to get that to you, to the commission, for those custom questions. And it is broken down the same way. You can see
Yeah.
it by the, it's just hard to read, because it's like one question with everything, one
Yeah.
response with it, for each response, there's one row in the database, and every question all the way across. So it's a little bit of a struggle. So we'll have to sort through that to narrow it down for you.
Yeah, that would be tremendously useful. And oftentimes, if I go on a National Citizen Survey site, so U.S. Census, you can download the CSV files from the survey and do your own. I think a lot of people in Palo Alto are data literate, and so not just us, but I think a lot of people would appreciate drilling into these. So in particular, my point, if you're looking at this, is that for our commission, when we think about planning, we are thinking about the location of people relative to services, whether that changes behavior, the location of people relative to transit, and whether that changes their driving behavior, et cetera. And so these are the questions that get to that answer, whereas the questions on Tableau are generally around happiness with various things, which is also useful and interesting, but less useful than those particular questions, which are around the location of people relative to usage and behavior. So that would be my comment. As a secondary comment, there's only 2 areas that stand out as terrible and getting worse, and those are housing and transportation.
Correct.
Those are the only areas that are below 30% happiness. In the case of housing, for various reasons and various permutations of questions, between 8% satisfaction and 15% satisfaction, whether you're asking about housing variety or types, affordability, et cetera. The one that interests me is the diversity of housing, because when you drill down into it in Tableau, the answers vary quite a lot by age, by income level, et cetera. Whereas affordability across every age, across every income level, across every housing type, everyone says it's poor. And to Nielsen's point, it's possible just no one necessarily knows what question they're answering, but they know it ain't affordable. But the diversity question is one where you are getting quite different responses depending on who the person is and what their life situation is. And so my ask is, if we have input for additional questions for the future, this is one to dig into. And I would agree with Nielsen that given that this is an area that rates so low, we should try to get as specific as possible. But this was one where there's clearly a marked difference between the younger and the older, and between various income levels. Finally, transportation is the other one that rates lowly. And I think that you are already asking a lot of the proper questions. The answers I would seek are probably around the custom questions that you have and being able to break that down into how people use services. But that's it for me. Those are my requests and questions.
Okay, so in response to that, I think that maybe planning, the planning department can work with you to develop some questions. I am going to try to ask for custom questions a little bit earlier this year than I have in the past, because at the end we really crunch to try and get this out in time for it to be useful for the council members. And so if you can work together, maybe come up with the questions that you want and submit them to me, then I'll have them ready, hopefully no later than late May. That will give me time to really work with the National Research Center of getting them worded the right way if we need to make some changes.
That's wonderful. Thank you.
Commissioner Olczak. Any other comments, questions? Go for it.
Okay, great. Sorry, I want to wait to see if anyone else had anything. So I think that in past years, there's been a number of hot button issues that have led to custom questions. And based on some of the answers, some of them seem to be a little bit red herrings. So park resources availability, quality of new development, and economic development overall. Our responses in Palo Alto seem to be in line with other communities or trending in a direction that would make you feel that the storm and fury is highly localized, meaning perhaps a smaller minority of vocal people. So based on this survey, it really does seem like it's housing and transportation. And so if you only have a certain number of chits to spend on custom questions, then the second half of my comments is what things do not seem to be as big of a deal as seem to be reflected in the general environment. I think that's also useful to go through and find the things that often seem to dominate discussion, but maybe when you survey a broader group of people, the level of satisfaction and the direction of that satisfaction seem positive. So I think it's equally valuable to start to put aside the things that seem to be going well when you survey a larger part of the community.
Yeah, and that makes sense. And with the custom questions, you're correct on a certain number of chits. This year, we did ask more. We paid for an extra page of survey, which was actually because we had more interest in custom questions. And everyone, if you just want to look, the survey materials are at the end of the booklet. Beginning on page 56, you see the survey, the standard survey questions. The custom survey questions begin with question 14 and then go through question 24. So we had a whole extra page this year that included custom questions. There's a couple of custom questions embedded in the other parts of the survey, but they don't stand out as much because they aren't worded the same kind. They're worded similarly to the other types of questions, so we're able to move them into there. But looking at those custom questions there, again, narrowing down the topics, I definitely agree there's some things that are more important and to focus on, and housing, transportation both fit nicely with the council's priorities, and so maybe drilling down a little bit more into those will help for the next council retreat also.
So I've just got two quick comments. One, I completely agree with Commissioner Rosenblum that housing and transportation are the two big ones here. I was also looking at some of the data here. I think it's really interesting that in general, issues such as Palo Alto's place to work or to raise children or to retire kind of correlate with the predictable things, right? If you're retiring, how old you might be, if there's a place to work, how much you earn. But everyone seems to be worried about housing and transportation, both affordability, accessibility, and the variety of housing and transportation choices. To me, as a commissioner here, that kind of indicates that everyone recognizes it's a problem and hopefully folks will solve it, even if they are coming from different backgrounds. The second question or comment I kind of had, I was kind of struck that you said that the response rate is steadily declining over the years. And then also, Mr. Buchanan mentioned, civic engagement is a huge issue. Look at our audience here, as you mentioned. Could you just speak a little bit more about that? Like, is that a national trend? Is that just a Palo Alto?
So it's interesting you asked that because I did look this up a little bit. So if you go to the very first page of the executive summary, I did put a table in there so that you could see how the response rate has changed over time. We started off 48%, 51%. So you see a few years that are in the low to high 40s, 1 year in the 50s. Then you see a group of years in the 30s. Then you see a group of years in the 20s. And it's just kind of doing this declining trend over time. I believe it's a national trend because I went back to these early years, and the National Research Center does put a comment in here on the response rate. I didn't flag that one. I think it's fairly early in here. That says that what the range typically is, and I've noticed that they've lowered that range over time. If you go back to the early 2003 survey, it does show the range is much lower of a typical range. So I want to say that somewhere in here, I can't remember where, they say that 25% is within a typical range. In the early years, they used to say a typical range was like 25 to 40%. Now they've lowered that, and we're still within a typical range, but the whole thing has shifted downward.
So, I mean, what are some other municipalities or counties doing? What's Palo Alto looking at? It's just worrying to me. I mean, I got one of the surveys last year, and I was really excited to fill it out. I didn't get one this year, and I was a little disappointed, but it's okay. So what can the city do there? It just seems like this is such valuable data. I just love to see more happening. And I'm also coming at this from my perspective of working in civic engagement and civic technology. And it's a tough nut to crack. I get that.
Right. You know, I don't know. We thought that last year, some of the efforts, we did put some extra effort in last year, and it didn't make a difference. So last year, we did a press release, and there was an article in Palo Alto Online that encouraged people to participate, but we only got a 27% response rate, which was a lower response rate than the previous year, although it was the same as 2012. We also, I called people who are like neighborhood group leaders, where they had an established neighborhood group board. I would call the president. I called several of them and talked to them. I called the people who do the whole Palo Alto neighborhoods group overall. And then we also put a notice on Nextdoor. Our communications director in the city manager's office helps us with the outreach, but it just doesn't seem like it makes a difference. I can talk to the National Research Center and see if they have any other suggestions, but they told us they thought we were doing the right things. Next month, I'm actually doing a presentation with the Portland City Auditor's Office on just doing surveys in general, and they're an office that has always done theirs on their own, and I'll be meeting with him. Well, I'm doing the presentation in May, but I'll be meeting with him next month, and we're going to be discussing some of the things that have helped us get success. So I'm hoping I might get some ideas from him.
Yeah, no, I think that's worth pursuing. I think that's all my questions. Commissioner Olczyk?
So I just have sort of a general comment. I think I share some of the other opinions about how we can improve this process, but sort of along different lines. I just wanted to share one of my responses to, I think, one of your responses. So, when if we approach land use from I don't want to say it from an insensitive sort of perspective. If we approach land use from the perspective that we try to achieve sort of the best use, and the best uses are often represented by sort of the highest market value. Tennis courts, for example, are a poor use of land, right? Because very few people can use it the way it's intended to be used at the same time, right? And I'm a huge tennis player, so I appreciate how, that's not necessarily my self-interest. I'd like to make an analogy to, there seemed to be this heightened sensitivity in the report about the falling sense that Palo Alto is a good place to retire. I would suggest that Palo Alto's appeal as a retirement community is not a priority that a city like ours should have. We are essentially in the center of one of the most intense employment, spaces in the United States. It struck me as odd that the report seemed very concerned about that dropping rating. And I kept thinking, everything about this location suggests that it would not be an appropriate place to enhance its appeal as a retirement community. People who are retiring are on fixed incomes. People who are retiring typically are not participating in the workforce. And yet we are in the epicenter of Silicon Valley, where people are attempting to relocate to participate in the center of the tech world. So every retiree in Palo Alto is theoretically displacing a user of that same land who would contribute actively in the workforce. Now, I appreciate that the vast majority of participants in our process are older and maybe even retired. And I imagine that when they hear me say that, it's not welcome. But I just want to sort of suggest that when someone designs a retirement community, they design it very differently than they would a city in the epicenter of the Bay Area, I believe. You'd think maybe there'd be a greater number of golf courses. Maybe there would be activity centers for retirees. Maybe the approach to mobility would be different for a retiree than it would be for a commuter who's participating in the workforce. I mean, these are important considerations. And so I frequently encounter this thought when I hear from someone who uses our community as a retiree versus someone who uses it as a younger person in the workforce. Their approach, their issues with parking, their issues with transportation are similar, although different than the way an individual who's participating in the workforce sort of encounters those same challenges. I don't know that the solutions that we come up with for commuting to work will serve the same population of individuals who are just as displeased with traffic and congestion that are retired. And I think acknowledging that those solutions will not achieve the same result for both those groups is important. I don't know that the city can do much financially to make Palo Alto a place where individuals on a fixed income or no income can sort of manage their expenses better, which is one of the key components to sort of the appeal of a retirement community, is that maybe the cost of living is not constantly increasing. So I imagine that there are forces at play outside of our own efforts that are really playing a role into sort of creating a disincentive to retire here. And I think the question is whether or not we as a city attempt to take on that shift as a part of our land use planning, or whether we acknowledge, like I would, that a tennis court really doesn't serve as many people as a Little League park or a volleyball court or a number of other recreational facilities that you could potentially put up. That doesn't mean we shouldn't have tennis courts, but I just wanted to throw that out there because I think as we approach these topics, and I think as we approach, generally the questions, is that really even the right question? Is knowing whether or not people think that Palo Alto is a good place to retire even relevant? Anyways, I'm sure there might be other opinions on that, but I just wanted to say that.
Thank you. Commissioner Waldfogel.
Great, thank you. So one question, I'm just looking at the census, census.gov data on housing affordability, and there's a little bit of a disconnect between what you got as results in this survey. They're saying that only 8% report the availability of affordable, high quality or affordable quality housing, but according to the census data, in every income category, it's between 80 and 95% of the households in Palo Alto are spending less than 30% of their household income on housing. This is according to census data. So I think I really have to reinforce what Nielsen said, which is it's not really clear what question people are answering. They might be answering a question about some condition other than the condition in their house. Yeah, their perception. So I just wonder, how can we get to asking people a question that's sort of more direct on whether they're experiencing an issue or whether they're subjectively perceiving there might be an issue for somebody else? Because I think if somebody else is perceiving a problem, we need to get to those people and survey what their issues are rather than trying to project onto it.
So we would do that through the custom questions. And regarding what you're seeing there, we don't ask the question quite the same way. So we say, what is your income? And then we ask them how much you pay for housing. We would have to go into Tableau and do a cross tabulation of those two different sets of data to see how it compares to what the census shows.
Yeah, well, I will take the census data as definitive since they're pretty good at it. But anyway, there's a disconnect between what we see in this study, and so it really begs the question: what question do people think they're answering?
Right, and on these two questions, they actually are more specific. If you look at page 51 in your booklet, on the question of how much your monthly housing cost is, they say include rent, a mortgage payment, property tax, property insurance, and homeowners association fees. So it doesn't include utilities, but it includes other expenses. And then on income, it's asking for a total income before taxes from all sources for all persons living in your household. So we could make some correlation between those two sets of data, but I'm not sure exactly. I'd have to look at the census data to see how they ask that question, to see if there's a comparison.
Commissioner Rosenblum?
Yeah, I just wanted to I couldn't help myself. I do need to make a quick response to Commissioner Alchek, which is, I don't think this forum is really about yet saying what we think the policies are. It's about what data we should collect for the CAC, comprehensive plan, others to consider when making policies. And so whether or not we think it should be a place that encourages more retirees or more young families, I think is a different issue. I mean, to me, the focus is what data do we need to help support so that decision makers, including ourselves, when we start to think about what policies we want to support, can help make those decisions. So I'm just encouraging us to view it through that framework versus the implications, which I'm sure we'll get to, and we all are raring to go. But I just wanted to respond to that. I do hope we separate those two duties. I'll say.
That's quickly.
Yeah. So I guess you're right. I appreciate that. Having additional information is good. I guess I would suggest that the real purpose of my comment was to highlight whether or not asking that question is relevant. And maybe even it's more relevant to suggest that there ought to be a question in the survey that says, do you think it should be a priority that Palo Alto is a good place to retire? Maybe that's a sort of even better question. Because I would like to know, and if, I assume I know the answer, but I guess my point is I think it's important not just to understand whether or not people in the community think of Palo Alto as a good place to retire. I think what we really want to know from the community is whether they think it should be a good place to retire. Do they think that the mobility solutions that they suggested are problematic should serve commuters in a better way, or should we be, it's not just asking them, what are the things you don't like about the city? The question is what are the things you don't like about the city because they're not serving what goal? And that was sort of my comment. I appreciate that I was sort of opining about the implications, but to me, it's sort of the same. There's a relevancy question here. And sometimes I think, I guess what I was trying to say is whether or not that is even the right question. So, but I appreciate what you said.
Great, thank you. Commissioner Downing.
Sure. So I wanted to respond to Commissioner Wolfogel with regard to the housing affordability aspect. So, you know, I think that it's true that there's not that many households, and I mean, there's a significant number of households, but they're not an outrageous number of households in Palo Alto that are what we call, you know, rent or cost burden. I think that that part is true, but I don't see a disconnect between that and the majority of Palo Alto believing that we don't have affordable housing. I mean, you could have an excellent living and understand that you have an excellent living and you're capable of living here and other people aren't. So I don't see a disconnect between the data there. You could be privileged and very well recognize that you are in fact privileged.
All right, thank you all. Thank you very much for that report. It's very helpful. And everybody, please hold on to these books or the Tableau report. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Let's go to our third item for the day, which is the comprehensive plan update. I believe this is Director Gittleman.
Thank you, Commissioners. Hillary Gittleman, the Planning Director. It's a pleasure to be here. I just, you know, kind of have a short rundown of what's been going on with the comp plan process and what comes next, and would be happy to answer any questions you have. You know that we're kind of been on 3 parallel tracks this last year. We have been engaged with the Citizens Advisory Committee on meetings related to comp plan policies and programs. We've been holding a series of city council sessions on goals and vision statements, and then on some big issues that need to be resolved in the comp plan update. And then we've also been preparing the CEQA document that will be needed at the end of the day to analyze the comp plan update and be able to make a decision on a final plan. So I'm going to go into each of those things a little bit more. First, on the Citizens Advisory Committee, the committee's been doing good work going element by element through the comp plan, and they started with community services and actually presented a draft work product to the council and got some great feedback. The group has discovered, it's a large group, Chair Fine is on the committee, he can speak to this as well. It's over 20 people meeting once a month. It's hard to do more than really surface issues and priorities in the larger group session. So the Citizens Advisory Committee is finding that subcommittees are crucial to move from kind of the big idea agreements and disagreements phase to actually getting to work products that reflect the view of the committee. So a subcommittee was impaneled to work on community services and has taken the city council's input, refined the recommendation, and that's going back to the full committee in what we hope is a brief, you know, kind of check-in consent item kind of thing at the next meeting. The same process is underway for the transportation element. So the Citizens Advisory Committee had a couple of really good sessions on transportation, and there have now been several meetings of a subcommittee. They will probably meet one more time before that element goes back to the full CAC, and then after that onto the City Council for their review. Now the full CAC has started their work on land use, which is, you know, the big element here. I think they've had 2 meetings so far with 2 to go. They're making good progress, and again, a subcommittee has been impaneled to start working on what have been identified as the key areas of potential disagreement, where we have to either come up with one recommendation from the committee or a series of choices for the council to weigh in on. And so that the next meeting of the CAC, April 19th, will focus on that, and hopefully the subcommittee will be bringing back their summary of these issues to be resolved. We also separately have impaneled a subcommittee about sustainability issues. If you recall the council's request, and I think the PTC recommended this as well, that sustainability be a kind of thematic thread through the elements, and rather than being its own element or dealt with separately, that it be kind of one of the big ideas that gets added in the current update to the comp plan. And the idea of the subcommittee on sustainability is to ensure that happens. So they're meeting on each of the elements as they're being prepared to make sure the elements address that theme. And at the end of the day, I think they'll probably be they'll be instrumental in bringing all of the policies and programs within the comp plan elements that relate to sustainability into one kind of index or summary of sustainability in the book. So that's kind of what the comp plan CAC is doing, and for those of you who are interested, I would encourage you to stop by the April 19th meeting. I think it's going to be a really good one on land use. Okay, so separately, the City Council has been having meetings on policy issues. The last one was just over a week ago, on the 21st, about housing issues. If you recall, the City Council has already had a session in which they've indicated that they would like to expand the draft EIR that we are circulating for public comment. Prior to finalization, they want to analyze another scenario in the EIR, fifth scenario. And so we were really hoping that the discussion on housing at the council level would help us define that fifth scenario. And I think we got a lot of great input, both for the CAC on how the land use element might support the goals and policies in the housing element, but also for the staff about how we can think about this fifth scenario that we're going to have to define for analysis in a little supplement before we get to a final EIR. So the ideas, you may have heard about it, and I think maybe a couple of you were at the hearing, but the council focused in on the idea of small units or micro units, even thinking that we could advance kind of a pilot program to measure the effectiveness of small units with a kind of adaptive mitigation approach to minimize the impacts of new dwelling units. They talked a little bit about workforce housing, so how do we target housing production for people who don't presently qualify for, quote, affordable housing, but nonetheless are having trouble finding housing in the current market conditions. It talked a lot about enforcement of like vacation rentals and other things that are a stressor on our housing supply. And they did again, although it was a split vote, it was a 5-4 vote, talk about the idea of moving some of the housing sites from South Palo Alto. So there are some housing sites in our housing element on San Antonio Road and in South El Camino. They talked about eliminating those in favor of increasing densities downtown and near Cal Ave, where there's greater access to transit and services. It's unfortunate that was kind of a split vote, but we did get that direction, which will help again with us crafting the fifth scenario. So let me talk about that for a minute. So that one of the big next steps is the commission is being asked to hold a public hearing on the draft EIR at your next meeting, April 13th. And our hope is that you and the public who attend that hearing will offer us comments on the alternatives, the impacts, and the mitigations that are in the draft EIR that's been circulated. I think you all got hard copies of that, and of course it's available online as well. We would like comments on the analysis that's been done to date so that we can make any additions or corrections we need to when we go to the final EIR. Any comments you give us, we can also help us inform the definition of this fifth scenario. Since we already know we're going to do more analysis, anything that you can provide in terms of creative ideas we can try and incorporate or address in that supplemental analysis. Of course, the commission knows this, public hearings are not really typically a back and forth. It's typically to get your comments and questions, and then we respond in writing formally later in the process as part of the final EIR. So you'll be holding that hearing on April 13th. Then other next steps, the City Council will be holding a discussion about the Sustainability and Climate Action Plan on April 18th, so the following Monday. And then they will be holding their public hearing on the draft EIR on April 25th. So we're hoping that all of the input we get in the course of those discussions, your hearing, the council's hearing, the SCAP discussions, and the comments we receive in writing by the end of the public comment period, which is May 5th, all of that is used to help us define the fifth scenario for analysis this summer. And then we can get to a final EIR with responses to comments and the whole ball of wax before adoption of the comp plan. And the current schedule has the comp plan process, the CAC finishing their work by the end of this calendar year, and then the council finishing their work by the middle of next year. So that's sort of what we're shooting at. We'll see what additional twists and turns there are on the road to get there. But happy to answer any questions about that. I know it's kind of multi-layered and a little complex, but that's where we are today.
Thank you very much, Director Gittleman. Yep, it is a very complex, multi-layered process with a lot of moving parts, so we all appreciate the hard work that staff's doing to keep that going. I actually just wanted to start with a few comments on the CAC and then open it up to everyone else. The CAC is a diverse group of 20 or so Palo Alto residents. I think what's been interesting to me is around many issues, there's actually a lot of consensus. Folks agreeing on issues like community services and police services and maybe what the relationship with Stanford is. When it comes to housing, though, there's a bit of a divide. I won't say it's split evenly between like some pro-development groups and smart growth or low growth groups, but that's kind of my feeling. And I think that was the first big breach on the CAC, which has not been resolved yet. So when the CAC presented to council last Monday, their presentation was good and well thought out. It represented a range of views, but internally it wasn't that consistent. So that's something the CAC is really dealing with. And I'd encourage you all to attend the meetings going forward. Just another note, as I've spoken to other CAC members, there is a question about when an element ceases to be drafted. The CAC is taking their recommendations to council. Council provides feedback. But then is it done being drafted, or is council going to go back to it a few months later and change things or send it back to the CAC or to PTC? So that's a question that's still open to a lot of folks. And maybe, I don't know if you have a comment there about when an element is done and done.
You know, our thought was that the CAC would do their work, they'd present a draft to council, get feedback, and then we would, you know, either the staff or the CAC, someone would do a last revision, and then they'd just be, you know, put in a pile, you know, element by element we'd finish, and then, you know, at the end of the year, we'd hand it all back to the council. Mm-hmm. So the council would have had one review, but then they'd get the whole thing as a piece to take through the end of the final vetting process, and you would get that too. I mean, that's the point at which the PTC will have to do its re-review and recommendation, because there's an obligation on of the PTC to make the recommendation to the council.
Right. So I think it's incumbent upon the city to make sure it's very clear to the public, to the CAC, and to council, and us, frankly, right? We're not drafting this thing endlessly. So 2017 seems a long way off. Those are my first couple of comments. I think let's open it up. Commissioner Rosenblum, I think you're first.
Yeah, I think you might have just answered my question, but I just want to clarify. So it seems that the PTC's input into the comp plan comes in the two ends. So the draft EIR comments will help guide some of the scenarios that are considered, but then it is a process of CAC to council, back to CAC, and then put into the big stack, and then at that point, PTC will have comment. Is that correct?
That's correct. That's the way we've framed it right now. But I should say the CAC has and is using as one of its source documents the recommendations of the PTC that were forwarded to council in early 2014. So that work that the PTC already did is on the table as input to what the CAC is doing.
Yeah, that was my question. Thank you.
Yes, so just as I've experienced in the CAC, we get essentially the packet that PTC put together with some additional data or notes from staff, and that's kind of the base draft that the CAC has been using. Vice Chair Gardias.
Yes, thank you very much, Chair. So my question was pretty much in the same regards that my colleague colleagues talk about, but I would like to know, understand, have more clarity about at least potential review by PTC of different elements. And I understand that, as you said, that CAC bases their discussions on the input that was provided 2 years ago to them, and now it goes to council. But at least I think that within PTC purview would be review of those elements, just to make sure that if there is any deviation, what this from the initial input, what this deviation mean to our forward work, and then we would have ability to comment upon those deviations, if there is any. So I think that my expectation would be there will be two parts of our review. One, understanding, and then the second, potential comment, if there is truly, if some recommendations are going in the maybe different direction than initially was perceived.
Well, thank you. I think that's a great observation. That's going to be a critical input from the commission's perspective at that point. What we're thinking is that the elements would come to you as a package, and one of the real valuable roles you could play at that point in the process is helping with internal consistency. So you could not only compare the documents to the initial drafts that the PTC had provided and see what's changed and opine on that, but this body is probably well equipped to do that review for internal consistency. You know, because the CAC is working one at a time through the documents,
right.
But our obligation when we get to the full product at the end is for a policy framework that's internally consistent. And so I thought that would be an important role for the commission to play, and then to make a recommendation to the city council.
Okay.
On that.
So the entire package of all the elements would come to us.
That's right.
We would review this at one swoop, and then it would go to council, but those elements are already being reviewed by council, right?
That's right. What's happening is it's kind of a check-in with the council. So the council wanted to see how the CAC is doing, so the CAC is coming up with draft work products and the council is giving them some feedback. But we're not going to put the whole thing together until the CAC has been through all of the elements.
Of course. And to just the last thing is just giving the timeline that you provided, that CAC would finalize their work by the end of 2016. We would probably expect the elements being provided to our review either at the end of 2016 or at the beginning of 2017, right?
That's the current schedule, yes.
Okay, very good. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments, questions? Commissioner Waltfogel.
Yeah. I'm actually a little confused by your comment that you see us copy editing or checking for consistency. I mean, that seems like a pretty inefficient use of the Planning Commission. So I'm not quite sure what you're looking for there, since under code, I think we have a broader responsibility than copy editing a document that's produced elsewhere.
Well, yeah, no doubt, and I didn't mean to suggest copy editing. What I was thinking of is in terms of policies. We have, when you work on a policy framework for transportation over here and a land use framework over here, policy framework for land use over here, you're thinking about them in isolation, and when the PTC sees them together is an opportunity for us to ensure that we're
okay, well then my request is that we get something like 120 days to do that, because that's not going to be a 4-day process.
Yeah, understood. Yeah, no, I think this is going to be a complex effort. I think it's going to probably take multiple meetings by the PTC. And we're going to want you to fulfill your charge under the charter to give the council your recommendation on the full document.
Commissioner Olczyk?
I just have a quick question about, I guess I'd like to hear a little bit more about the fifth scenario. Is that exercise the result of sort of council's is it sort of the saving grace scenario, like the other scenarios were sort of rejected in an initial sort of process, and they're searching for some sort of catch-all scenario? I'm just a little curious about how that scenario will get developed and what's sort of the goal of the fifth scenario? Just I know that it hasn't been fully developed, but
tell you what I know about it. We got direction from the council on February 22nd. So they at that point had kind of a high-level summary of the 4 scenarios that are analyzed in the draft DIR, and I think their feeling was that they're all shades of gray or shades of green, whatever. They're pretty closely related to each other. And their desire was to test the boundaries a little and see if we couldn't design a scenario that was a little different and that was focused on preserving or enhancing the quality of life in Palo Alto. So if it had additional growth, it had also had some kind of creative performance management system, so that the growth occurred to the extent that impacts can be mitigated. And so they've sent us, back to the drawing board to come up with some recommendations and some options for the 5th scenario. And we think that the comments we get in the public comment period on the draft DIR will help us inform that discussion with the City Council, which will probably happen in the middle of May at this point.
This is a different question. I'm sort of piggybacking on Commissioner Walfogel's, but do you think that our process could somewhat be abbreviated because of the amount of, I guess, public invitation to the CAC process? I mean, I guess when I think of our role in this, it's really to be a forum to take in a lot of public comment, and maybe we will still have to do that, but I would appreciate sort of if some of our messaging was like, don't miss the opportunity now to participate in the public process. Don't rely on our 2-3 meetings or council's 1 or 2 meetings to sort of decry how horrible this is. If you've really got, you know what I mean? I sort of like the idea, actually. I think it's by design, right, that we have this whole process and then we get it last. I think there was, I guess, my perspective on this process is that it wasn't working. The typical process wasn't working for City Council, and so they wanted to sort of get the public involved in a much bigger way. And the Commission's role isn't necessarily to sort of become the forum for the public to participate in the process. The public are being invited early on. And so in some regards, I imagine that our quote-unquote editing of the document will be limited because we'll have to acknowledge how much public input has already been put in it. So I hope that we're messaging that well, that people appreciate that, so that it doesn't become one of those things where at the tail end of this, there are so many people that are not pleased with it, and then they feel like they didn't, they shouldn't feel like they didn't get a chance to participate because you've been inviting them. But I think our sort of emphasizing maybe, or it sounds like maybe creating greater clarity about how really significant our role will be, or how in depth that final, because in my sense, if council is going to review each piece one at a time, and then they'll get it once all together, it'd be a shame if they had to dig in deep on specific issues as opposed to sort of the global review at the end, right? So I hope I hope it works the way that I think it's intended to work.
Yeah, we'll see. I think the CAC understands their charge as gathering public input. We're using a online commenter in addition to the meetings that the CAC is holding. But I think they clearly understand that their role is to identify the areas where there are disagreement so that they can be surfaced for public discussion and for ultimately council decision-making. So let's hope that works.
All right, I think that's all the lights I see. Thank you very much, Director Gittleman. It's a pleasure having you here, and thanks for the update. Just actually one last thing. Like when we do finish the comp plan, is there like a party or something? I mean, what happens?
We're going to have a huge party.
I hope so. I hope so.
We'll put it on the schedule. What a great idea.
Is the comp plan on schedule?
I mean, no, there's not a date as far as I know. It seems like mid-2017, but I say when we get to that date, we have some kind of
I
party.
just want to know when to get the suit.
Thank you so much. Let's take just a couple-minute break and then get back to our last item.
Late 2007.
Yeah, but again, we have to encourage them to talk to me because okay, yeah, no, we're just in this awkward transition now. Yeah, but I mean, I was talking to this woman today who brought her time. She has to 9 months of this, just to build her house in Old Palo, and it's not working with the schedule. Like this is not right. She has to be in planners. We had some people on that leave. Another person just left. It's crazy. Yeah. Returning a phone call. And we're working on it. I mean, yeah, no, it's horrible. It's horrible. Get resolutions right away. Yeah. Yeah. Well, so it's not, we're not there yet, but we're starting to, one of the things I've just done, like it's will play itself out in May, is we've changed the ARP staff report a little bit, so we're focusing people on issues. Yeah. But I would tell, I have told this to him actually, is that we spend a heck of a lot of time working them through the process. And if you want to submit again, you can have it, sure. If you want to do it again, because so like we'll get 3 submittals, and Roger's not the fastest contractor around. But we can be quicker. We can be quicker. The plans come in, we give them the round of comments, we get it back and make a decision on it. Well, I think residential is more sensitive, I would say. Yeah. You know, if it wasn't for that March 31st deadline, you probably still wouldn't have seen those. Yeah. Right. Yeah. And the other thing is, they're asking for things in the environment, pollution stuff, so forth. Ken's got this project, design the breach, first round. Yeah, well, that one's not been good. I would say on the other side of the aisle, but probably more so on our side. That project, they're looking for seismic bonus. They're not on the list. They had to go get on it. So it's like, yeah, dude, I mean, we'll try, but you're pushing the envelope. And you also have some illegal construction on site.
I'd like to call this meeting back to order. We've got one last item. Hopefully it's a quick one. So this last item is the Planning and Community Environment Work Plan discussion. And this is a discussion that staff will lead, reviewing the department's work plan for the year, which we're about a quarter through already. And it's going to highlight some key initiatives and provide an opportunity to discuss planning and transportation priorities. Just 2 comments before we get started on this one, actually 3. One is that we all know council has their own priorities, and we can be helpful to council if we align our priorities and encourage staff to do the same with council. 2, we all know that the planning department is oversubscribed and has a lot of work, but is down in some staff, so that's important to keep in mind. And then finally, and I think most importantly, we didn't do this so much last year, but I think this is an opportunity for us to begin thinking about our joint meeting with council in terms of what PTC priorities are, what staff priorities are, and what council priorities are, and how we kind of write that letter and have that session at the end of the year. This is a good place to start thinking about it and hopefully provide some good input. With that, I'll hand it off to our Assistant Director.
Thank you, Chair Fine. I think that's a great introduction, and I was just commenting a moment ago to Commissioner Waldvogel. I feel like this discussion is a little bit too late, but also a little bit too early for the discussion that's forthcoming. But no time like the present. I think we can tee it up and then have a future conversation for your joint session with the City Council and between the PTC and the City Council. So with that, and actually I had a draft presentation that was included in your packet. You should have a new version. I cut some of the stuff out and move stuff to the back. If you're interested, we can have a conversation about our strategies. But I have a particular slide in here, especially for Vice Chair Gardias, that we will get to in just a moment. So if we look here at the contents, and I would like to draw the Vice Chair's attention to the third to last bullet on this list. This is something that the Commissioner Gardias has been asking for a while in printed form, so I'm going to present it tonight in printed form for him and the rest of you. We'll go over some of these things. The one that is, actually it's omitted on the sheet, so I'll just keep going here. The department, I think you all know that the Planning and Community Environment Department is involved in a lot of different areas that we just heard Harriet talk about that touch the community in different ways, the built environment, of course, what happens on private property. We are also engaged in transportation and bicycle programs, housing programs, code enforcement, land use policies, private development projects. A lot of the work that we do is actually service-based, and we have a lot of assignments from the City Council that are policy-based, and we only have a certain percentage of our staff that actually is dedicated to that. But during last year, we were able to accomplish a fair amount of work. There's a few items here that you will recognize, but on this next slide, actually, I think the Planning and Transportation Commission has been a little bit more involved in seeing some of these different areas here. There was the zoning code update, which is actually was reviewed by the council last year, and there's one carryover piece having to do with the Architecture Review Board findings, which is going to go next month. All the other items, we had the conversation about the Tier 1, Tier 2s. Those got pulled off, and we'll come back and we'll revisit that with the Planning Commission this year, hopefully. The single-story overlays, we've seen an increase in those, and we continue to get applications for that. And the commission was also involved in a number of these projects that are listed here on this sheet as well. The majority of projects that went to the City Council that had an action item discussion related to work involving the Planning Community Environment Department. And that doesn't include the study sessions that we had where we sought council guidance or direction on some items. We support not only this commission, but the Architecture Review Board and the Historic Resources Board. And we have director hearings when there are requests for hearings on some discretionary applications that are handled at the staff level process. And we support the CAC that we were talking about earlier, payback, and had a number of other community meetings during the course of the year. You can see some other details. We had a lot of individual review applications, Architectural Review Board applications, and our capital improvement projects that we're involved in has increased last year. As you know, we ever since I've been here and before I got here, the department has had challenges keeping a fully staffed department. We are currently missing our planning manager for the long-range planning program, Jeremy Dennis, who took a job with another city. And we also have another vacancy in our long-range planning program, and this is the program that actually does a lot of the policy work that the City Council has asked us to do, and a lot of the work that would touch on this commission, including ADUs and some of the other policy conversations that are taking place. We have several contractors that we rely on to help us with our peak application processing, which is where we are now. We still have, I think it's like 6 contractors that are supporting us in the current planning application process. And we're still, even with that added capacity, there are some challenges. And when we're looking for consultant help, we're not the only ones, and there's others, it's hard to find consultants as well to assist us. Our program, or our hive, as illustrated by the bee here, consists of these different divisions that make up our department. And where's our staff? Most of our staff is in the current planning operation and in transportation. Transportation is broken up into 2 different programs here. There's transportation engineering and transportation planning. There's about 10 employees there, 12 in current planning. And again, you'll see later that most of our work effort and energy is spent in sort of service-related work. For about 9 months, we had a fully staffed management team, and before that, I don't know how many years back you have to go to find a similar moment in time when the management team was fully staffed. As I said, we're currently in the process of recruiting for the long-range planning manager. We are a largely general fund supported department. Our revenues that we do take in are related to application fees that we collect. As I mentioned in the director's report, that there was a we got council support to increase our fees. This will help bring in alignment the work effort that we are putting into these projects and collecting the fees for it. I think we've reported that additional increase in revenue of somewhere around $1 million of additional revenue to the city with the fee adjustments that are anticipated. And now for Commissioner Gardias. We have written the City Council priorities for the 2016 year. It's largely similar to what we had before, but it does reflect a lot of issues that are clearly related to the Planning and Community Environment Department, of course, housing and parking, and the issues that we've heard this commission speak to about livability, mobility, and things of that nature. The CIP-related programs, infrastructure, and continuing from last year, the Healthy City, Healthy Community Initiative, as well as the comprehensive plan effort. So the department, we have a number of priorities that we are working on that the council has asked us. So we get our priority assignments from the city council largely, and they go through an exercise in January, which sets forth a lot of the work that we will do. Some of it is a continuation from last year that we're trying to continue and wrap up. This is our project list for 2016. I would say it's probably not complete, but it reflects areas of work that we are attempting to make progress on, some of which we will and complete, others due to resource issues. Not all of this will get completed, I don't believe, in 2016, but we continue to make progress on the areas where we can and continue to have a conversation with the city manager and council about a work program for the department. This just sort of reflects the balance that we have between how much time we spend on priority projects versus service, and it's better reflected, I think, in this pie chart here. That shows roughly 65% of the work that we do is actually just supporting the community, application processing, supporting other departments in the city, and the amount of time that we actually have for the policy projects, the housing programs, the bicycle initiatives, the bike, all these different, big policy projects is about 70% of our workforce. So it's not a ton of people working on those efforts. So I think that Chair Fine's comments were right on point in terms of when we get ready for that joint session with the council. I'd like to actually come back and we can talk about what these, bring back the city council goals and priorities and bring back sort of the work program that we have it. And I think it would be helpful to hear from the commission what kind of advice or guidance that you might want to offer to the city council during that session, that joint session. So that might help give them some information when they're forming what the policy work program will be for the department for 2017. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Looks like you all have a lot on your plates. Let's open it up for comments, question, Vice Chair.
Thank you, Chair. So, Director Light, thank you very much for preparing, for capturing those City Council objectives and goals for this year. There was some importance in my mind of those goals. The reason was very simple because if you remember last year, we had a variety of different discussions and even some noted in the newspapers or publications, disagreements with councils. And I thought that some alignment of the council priorities and with commissions, with PTC's work would be appropriate. And for this reason, I ask you just to capture them and bring to our attention, because we should at least have those priorities in mind. So when we conduct our sessions, when we conduct our reviews, or our comments or our efforts should be aligned within those priorities, because otherwise we would be very much boiling the ocean as opposed to just meeting the objectives and just synchronizing with the work of the council and also the work of staff and other departments. So thank you for this, right? But also it may give us opportunity to look at those goals and maybe think of some goals that the Planning Commission, PTC, should have for this year. You know, as you may know, when organizations work on their strategic plans, there is always an alignment of the strategic goals of the lower level elements within the organization with the higher level element within this organization, which is council today. So that was the objective. Thank you again. I have a question from, if you don't mind, just from a different side, right? Because there was some delay of the transportation projects due to staff rotation. And then, as we know, right, there was a director left, that was last year. But then also recently we had some rotation at the transportation department. Are those vacancies being, and that backfired with delay of the transportations projects? We don't have them as many as we used to, as you may be aware. And I know that, for example, from perspective of the connector, Midtown connector, there was a delay of like about 2 to 3 months because of the rotation. So could you just comment about this, how those delays are being addressed? I know that probably Josh would be the better person to address, but you may just give us some insight.
Sure. Well, I guess I would say that we had, I think earlier this year, Jessica Sullivan came and gave a presentation about the sort of the status of different transportation work efforts. And I don't have that presentation with me presently, but I do know that there are a number of projects that are mapped out for the year, and I could actually transmit to the City Council or to the Commission sort of what we have planned for each of those projects, so that you have a better sense for where those transportation pieces are going forward and where the Commission may actually have some input into those processes. You're correct, there has been some turnover in the department, and but Josh Mello is the Chief Transportation Official, and he's been doing a fantastic job working with the staff and being focused in on getting those priority projects accomplished. There is a ton of transportation projects, for sure. It makes up a big percentage of the policy work that we need to do. And so he's working with his constituents and stakeholders to advance those projects. And I can get back to the Commission as far as which ones we think we might be able to see in 2016 and what the schedule is for some of those other ones.
Mm-hmm. One thing that I noticed, and I heard also the comments on some planning side, when there was a staff turnover, it was affecting the projects, not only our projects, but our customers' projects or your customers' projects. And specifically, if there was somebody was leaving department, there was always a period of 2 to 3 months of a handover when pretty much a new person that was coming to this position had to relearn the project within those 2-3 months, and to during this time, and then after this 2-3 months, the process was picked up again, which was causing delay on the site, affecting the developers or those that build or renovate in Palo Alto.
Yeah, there's no doubt that in the past, I would say, it could even be I was going to say within the last 8 to 12 months, it's been really difficult from a private development perspective, and the reason being principally is due to vacancies that we've had in our department. We had a period of time where I think we had 5 vacancies that we were trying to fill, and we also had some consultant personnel who had left the city. And so there was a period where we just did not have the staff resources or capacity to turn the projects out. And it is difficult then when you're taking those projects and reassigning them to other staff who's already overloaded with work to then take on other responsibilities that were previously assigned to other folks. We also had some promotional opportunities where we lost, where 2 senior planners got moved from, kind of like that day-to-day working format to then also working still for their projects, but then also having to manage different programs in the department. So there was a very challenging transition period for us. The good news is in current planning is that we are fully staffed now, and we brought in some new personnel, and we're realigning where our consultants are spending their time and energy, and where we're putting our staff working on that. I've also had some conversations with with the manager overseeing the current planning program, and we're developing a couple of other initiatives to ensure that we're moving projects along quickly and efficiently. And then I was actually having a conversation with Commissioner Waldfogel about the IR program, where there is a new push underway, and we're actually having an internal audit done, not by Harriet, but we've hired a consultant to analyze this, and this person has met with people, residents, people who are building homes, people who live next to the homes that are being constructed, architects, and there's a draft report that actually needs to take a look at that's going to say what's working, what's not working, and where can we make some refinements. And we do want to take that to the council and make some changes to that program. It's been about 10 years since we've looked at it. So I think that I would say that I don't know what you're hearing, but there certainly is a bit of truth, I'm sure, to the comments and the delays and the frustration. I'm aware of that, and we are working toward that. I will also acknowledge that sometimes we don't get a lot of clean plans in. Sometimes we have a lot of an iterative process. Sometimes people are asking for things that are not consistent with the code. Sometimes there's a contentious neighbor to neighbor issue. So we try to help smooth that out where we can, and that inherently extends a process, particularly if you're talking about an individual review. So we're trying to balance getting somebody to yes versus giving them a quicker response that may not be as favorable.
Yeah, so since you mentioned this, right, but thanks very much for the clarification. Since you mentioned this, that what I was hearing, that there were 2 elements, that when there was a staff rotation, then the handover timing was very lengthy, 2 to 3 months, which really shouldn't be. And then there was a second element, then that the new planner that was coming to work on this project had a different set of the requirements than the prior planner. And then, that was just causing some impact on the customers.
Thank you. And so you're absolutely right. I just had a meeting today with somebody who had 3 planners assigned to her project over the course of a 9-month period for an IR. So there's a couple problems there. One, you shouldn't have 3 planners working on one project. The IR should not take 9 months. And with each planner that got assigned to it, there were new comments, and because people read and interpret and evaluate the code in a project differently, which is why you want to have some consistency in those comments. So, and again, that is squarely a function of we had somebody here, that person left, it got reassigned, that person was here, that person left, it had to get reassigned. In the midst of that, we have people who are doing other functions and responsibilities. So the fact that it took 2 to 3 months for there to be contact again does not surprise me. I will say it is not good. And again, we are fully staffed now, and we are making contact with people to make sure that they have a point of contact for those projects. I've been engaged in conversations with people who have brought this tension between, hey, I got a set of comments here, I've been relying on this information for the past X number of months, we've had construction drawings made, whatever the story is, and I've been working on balancing those initial comments with where people are in the process and helping to mitigate that where I can. So I hear that, we're working on it, and I believe that we will not be in this position much longer, but there is this awkwardness that we still need to continue to get through. But hopefully with collective patience and dedication to that, we can solve that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Waldfogel.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation. I also really appreciate the candor about the struggles that you're going through with staffing, and that you're it seems like in recovery mode now. A budget question for you, which is when I look at the slide that reports percent customer service, 65%, and I assume, tell me if I'm right, that that is principally related to project workloads. Would that be correct?
Yeah, can you just bring me to?
So that is your, it's on page, you don't have page numbers on your slides, but it's page 8 of what you distributed. It's the
Okay.
2016 projects versus
Yes.
customer service. Oh, it's slide 16, I'm sorry. So you're reporting 65% is service,
Yes.
which I assume is related to applications. Would that be close to correct?
Yeah, it's applications, but it's also non-application services, working at the public counter, fielding phone calls, sitting with people before they have a meeting.
Okay, and then if you go back to your slide 11, the budgeted revenue and expenses
Yes.
slide, you're reporting 10.3 million in general expenses, so call it 6.5 million is attributable to services. If I put those two slides together.
Just to interject, I think this slide 16 is actually time. Staff
Yes.
time.
Yeah, but presumably the staff time is fairly closely correlated since the bulk of the expenses for the department are in salaries, benefits, and contract services. That's 75% of the department's expenses. I mean, what I'm trying to map this back to is that the other side of slide 11 shows that you're collecting order of magnitude $1 million of application-related revenues. So there's a bit of a deficit, and you did say that you're raising the fees, but you know, is it normal to have that kind of a deficit, a multi-million-dollar deficit between application fees and cost of processing applications? Is that something that we would like to be that size or smaller? Do we have surge pricing options? You know, if this is busy season, can we charge more? You know, can we be the Uber of fee structure? I mean, just are there creative things we could do to try to close that gap?
So so I would say that we have just gone through a process of looking at how much time it takes us to process an application, and that involves not only the planners but overhead and administrative staff that may not be having direct contact with applicants. The other part of the service that's not recovered is code enforcement, and we have 3 personnel in code enforcement related activities, but there's also service that's provided in advanced planning as well as in transportation. So our objective with the fee study recently was to better align our level of effort to the cost, and like I said, we hope to be doing that so that our revenues are getting toward that. But we still will be general fund supported on these other areas where we're not cost recoverable. And as far as having a creative solution to fees, I think Kara could probably speak to some of the requirements, but we can't charge more than the cost of the service, and that would preclude us from having this pricing schedule where it's when there's more demand, the price goes up. It's still the same amount of time to process the level of effort.
Well, that depends on how you do your cost accounting, but anyway, I'm not gonna argue that point.
Yeah, well, again, I think there's some pretty strict standards for how we can assess fees from a local government standpoint.
Commissioner Downing.
No, I'm okay, actually, thank you.
Commissioner Rosenblum.
Yeah, I think my question is related to Commissioner Waldfogel's question about service. I'm not sure I completely get what this 65% of time spent in service actually is, and whether you think that it's a healthy percentage, that this is what you expect for city staff to be doing. When I read it, I was viewing that as perhaps staff expressing that they often get distracted and difficult to focus on the council priorities, which are 17% of time spent. And so I thought there was a point being made to the slide that it's hard to align with the priorities of council because of other obligations. But I wonder if you can comment, what is in that bucket, and is this approximately the amount that you would expect to be in this bucket for the future?
Yeah, I do think it's about right in terms of how much time and effort we do spend on service-related items, our entire development services staff, which includes a full-time person and 3 people that our department doesn't get charged full-time for, is doing counter support operations, and that's something that's a daily activity that happens at the counter. That's not a cost recoverable feature for our department. Again, code enforcement, not a cost recoverable item. So there's 4.5 people there. Our long-range planning program, we've got a couple of people who are doing data research and analysis that supports the work of other employees, not only in PCE, but we also get a lot of requests from other departments for some mapping information using our GIS program, just the data collection that we do, and that's considered part of the service category. Our housing program and our housing manager is providing a lot of feedback and comments to people who are engaged in the housing programs that we participate in, and meeting with constituents, and the whole CDBG program. Those are services that we provide. So it's not all one-on-one applicant. It's a broader definition, I would say, of service than applicant-driven.
Yeah, so I guess my comment is, and when I read the slides, so slide 15 to begin with, you had the sub-headlines, 2016 projects for customer service, estimated 70% of PC staff time is spent on priority projects. I read that as a clear, that the point of calling that out is like, these are the priorities, but we only have less than 1/5 of our time to spend on them. And so particularly in the next year or so, when you're drafting this sort of decade-long document, right? So it's the comp plan is like the Olympics of planning. It feels like it feels like trying to extract more time into spending on these items is really important. I don't know how to do that, but my input is, if we're doing a strategic review of where you're spending your time, this is one that seems like it's got to be highlighted, that you don't have that much time available for strategic projects or council-directed projects.
Well, I think that's right. That is part of the message that we're trying to communicate, is that we do have a growing list of priority initiatives at the council. I mean, just last week ago Monday, there was a half dozen additional housing studies or areas of interest that the council wants us to explore, and that's not accounted for in these lists. So we are struggling a bit to balance the available resources to the volume of work.
Yeah.
And I would say the balance of the time is in response to, I mean, we have paying customers that we have to process applications. 12 of our staff is in current planning, and that is in that, and if it's more than that when you consider the development services in the planning area. Half of our, or about I think it's 30% of our current long-range planning team, the 17%, is vacant right now. We don't have, so even at our 17%, we have a vacancy of 30% of our workforce toward that effort.
Yeah, so the criticism I have then is that there doesn't seem to be a strategy to address that. You're saying that these are, and so the place that I would expect, for example, is that, say, well, here's a trade-off we'd have to make. We would have to decrease service levels, and that would imply the following. But for this year, that will enable us to shift resources and to hire another person here while reducing headcount there. And it will be painful, but this is what we, so I think you've identified an important problem. I don't really see how you're going to do it. And so that is a comment. I don't know. I don't have a prescription for how to do it either, but I do know it's not, it doesn't seem to be in this.
Yeah, this presentation was not about, identifying a solution to that. I will tell you that we are working on solutions. We are trying to find ways to address that. One of the ways that most governments do this is to get some consultant support. And so on the comp plan effort, we have done that. We have PlaceWorks that we've asked to contribute more time and energy to supporting us. We also are hiring a consultant, a seasoned professional who will be joining us, I think at your next CAC meeting, perhaps, who comes with a lot of experience. And so the moment we heard that Jeremy was not here, we actively went out and got somebody who could help us and will be committed to the project for at least another year. But as I said, we're not the only game in town when it comes to getting consultants, and there is a limited supply of quality consultants that are available to us. And we've been fortunate because we do have some really good folks that are working with us, but they don't work exclusively for Palo Alto. And so I just, even just as recently as a month ago, brought on another consultant that I knew and had some experience with. And so we are working to build our capacity. We're also working on some other areas, if I can just take that another step further, and trying to make our processes more efficient. And that's not only in the way that we are organizing ourselves, but also in the products that we're producing. And we're making changes to our internal computer systems to help us manage that workflow better. We're changing the way that we want to do our staff reports, that we're not spending as much time writing all these reports so they can be more concise. So we are making efforts, and I know that Hillary's been working, Director Gittleman has been working with the manager's office, and we've recently submitted a budget proposal for some additional resource needs that we've identified, and that will be going through the budget review process.
Thank you. I actually hadn't thought of this, but I agree with Commissioner Rosenblum that you all have identified a problem, but there's not quite a solution. Just a few I'll throw out there. One is maybe you should charge council when they add new policies, you know? Let them know the cost. Another couple that just come to mind quickly is, maybe it's prioritizing the staff hires you want. One other thing in a lot of the cities I speak to is, I don't know which ones are applied, but grant funding, whether it's like, some of the philanthropies or like Bloomberg's giving out a lot of money to cities nowadays. Just a few random comments. Commissioner Olczak, I think you were next.
So thank you for preparing this presentation. I wasn't going to, but after you repeated your comment about realigning, the revenues with the efforts, I couldn't keep quiet. It reminds me of the sort of debate about whether the post office needs to be making money, whether we can just actually have a service that costs money and be comfortable that some services are worth having that cost money and don't make money. To me, it seems a little, it's like I would encourage staff to not judge their effort based on how much money they're bringing in. To me, there shouldn't be a correlation between your fees and the time that you're spending servicing, because they're not intended to reflect how great an effort you're doing. And so I get it that you said that, but I don't, in my mind, this is a general fund service, and there's a serious irony here that our city is, okay, let me just say this. It's not Mr. Late's or Ms. Gittleman's responsibility to figure out how to fix this problem, frankly. The irony here is that we don't have a long-range planner. We haven't had one since he left, and our city is in turmoil trying to figure out what our long-range plan is. And it's really hard for me to sit here, and we're sort of asking him to explain to us how he's going to make this profitable, which it shouldn't be, and how they should allocate their time better. I think there's a tremendous amount of confusion that exists right now in terms of what you can and cannot do in the city, because there is a lot of mixed messaging about what will be okay and what is currently okay, and what is our current, how deficient is our current code, and how quickly are we going to change it. And I just think, I think the message should be they should dump twice as much money into this department, because it seems to be the only department, when you look at council's priorities, which are traffic, planning, then theoretically, if you take a top 5 list of the city council's priorities and you were to allocate the budget based on those, you would theoretically not be operating with just $10 million expenses. Maybe you ought to be operating with $20 million expenses, because your staff should be doubled. So from my perspective, I have a lot of sympathy for you, and I think your staff could be doubled. And I think that should be, someone should be saying that, because the parcels in this city are the most valuable parcels by square footage for like 100 miles. So naturally, every single resident is going to have questions about how to improve those parcels when the time comes, and they're going to come to your office. And to the extent that you can facilitate that process in a more quick way, you're doing everybody a service. And there's a part of me that believes that, I don't want to say it's calculated, but you're handicapped right now. You're operating at a disadvantage, you're understaffed, and you also don't have tremendous direction with what's coming, and you're missing your long-range planner who's supposed to facilitate that discussion. And so, I guess I would suggest to you that I don't think, maybe I'm part of a small minority that doesn't think or doesn't feel too concerned that you are not covering your expenses significantly. I think that this is a service that is valuable enough to the city that it doesn't have to be a revenue generator or a profit generator, if you will, or cover itself. And I would also argue that I think, and I can't say I know, because I'm sure there are conversations that happen all the time between city staff and city council, but it just seems to me like maybe there should be a stronger effort to sort of message that there needs to be bigger, they need to have more resources, a lot more. And it's sort of really unfortunate that we began this conversation with the disclaimer, or I don't know how you want to describe it, that just so we're clear here, they're really taxed. We have all these lofty goals on how to figure out how to make so many things better for the city, and the disclaimer is, well, we just don't get too excited, because frankly you won't be able to achieve any of them because our staff is completely overtaxed. So I'm sad about this scenario, and I don't know that looking at the way they allocate their time is relevant, because it's like suggesting to somebody who's drowning, that they should change their swimming trunks. I mean, anyway, sorry.
So, thank you. I appreciate the empathy for the work and the challenges, and there clearly are challenges. I will say that every planning department that I've been a part of for 20 years is definitely not a cost recovery program division. Oftentimes what you'll see in other cities is that planning and building are grouped together in a community development department or something, and I believe Palo Alto had a similar situation a couple years ago. And often what you'll get is a lot of revenue. I mean, revenue is probably not the right word, but building permits generate revenue. And that often balances out a department on a whole, at least in terms of numbers. And so maybe it's not as clearly revealed in other communities. But here in Palo Alto, where planning is in its own area, and you've got a transportation staff that is not receiving any revenue, and you've got a long-range planning staff that's not receiving any revenue, and there's 14 people right there. You got a code enforcement staff that's not receiving any revenue, which is also in the building department in many other cities. There's another, 15 now or so people. So a big part of our operation is just not cost recovery, and it won't be. And I don't think we're getting any pushback from, at least as I understand it, from people saying that we need to achieve cost recovery, that we need to balance things out. I think there is an understanding that the work that we do is general fund supported, and that there ought to be, funds dedicated to that. As far as the staffing levels go, yeah, I do think we probably need some more staff. But I would also say that, this is not a problem that just is afflicting Palo Alto. I mean, when we went into the recession, a lot of cities, every city was cutting resources, cutting staff. And as we, continue, I guess, I don't know how long we've been out of it now. Is it officially 6 years or so? I think municipalities are a little shy about wanting to add a bunch of resources back in for fear of having to be, supporting the unfunded liabilities, the salaries, and there's a whole community conversation that's involved with adding a single staff person, because you don't just get that staff person for the time that they're here, you also have to pay for that staff person when they're gone in terms of ongoing benefit commitments. So I think that there is a need for departments, including our own department, to think very strategically about where we need staff personnel and how we would deploy them, and also to look critically at our existing resources and are we deploying them in the best way now? Are there other efficiencies that can be gained? And I've always been very cautious about asking for staff, because myself and others have had to be in the position of having to let people go. And that's not a pleasant conversation to be in either. And so you're cautious about trying to strike that balance. Now, I will say here in Palo Alto, there is a ton of work. All the homes that we review, the commercial developments, there is a higher level of service that is needed in a community like Palo Alto. And there is a process by which that gets reviewed, and we've gone through that process, and we continue to go through that process, and the City Council will have an opportunity to hear the results of that process when they have their budget hearing, when we're asking for some additional staff. So I think that, so I think there's more work and I will say that I do think it is my responsibility and Director Gittleman's responsibility to find solutions to the challenges, but we can't, there's no magic bullet here. At some point, we just need to have a realistic conversation about what we can actually accomplish given the resources that we have, prioritize that, and then if we want to add new things to that, then, okay, what are we pulling off the list? Because we are beginning to get crushed under the weight of all of the work. So, and that has morale implications, I would say, as well, to staff that ought to be considered. So I appreciate your comments. I do think that there's a way that we can navigate this, but it takes some energy and some thoughtfulness on from all the different parts of that equation.
Thank you. Looks like we've got 2 more comments. Commissioner Downing.
So I thought I had an answer on this. I thought I heard you say it, but then I heard something else. So I want to get a career number. So total on staff right now, we have 38. Is that right? Okay. And then how many vacancies?
So right now, we have 2 in long-range planning, and I don't know the exact number in transportation. It's less than 2, I think. So I think right now our department has 4 vacancies.
Okay, and then in addition to those vacancies, how many more positions do you think need to be created?
So again, this is part of the budget process that we go through. We've asked for a number of positions, and I think that I can't speak as well for the transportation department because I'm not as connected to the needs there. In our for the other parts of the operation, we've asked for another planner to assist us at the counter and taking in applications, and an administrative support person. Those are the ones that I believe will be advanced onto council. And there are positions that have been requested in transportation as well.
Okay, so at least 2 more people, it sounds like, since you can't speak to transportation.
Yes, I mean, if you're asking for so that's what's going forward.
Right, okay.
Okay.
I understand. Yeah, I mean, I do have to say, I mean, I can't help but agree with Commissioner Alchek's comments, right? I mean, all the top council priorities, they're all going to you guys, and yet you're such a small portion of the budget, you're such a small portion of the staff. And it just, you know, time and time again, this is what the citizens say they care about. Time and time again, it's transportation, it's housing that's at the very top of the list for everybody in terms of the things that they want and they need out of this city, and where they think that their tax dollars should be going. So, you know, I certainly hear the concerns that you have, and certainly the long-range concerns with increasing staff, but, I mean, you're sort of on perpetual burnout mode at this point too, which doesn't help with retention either. So I hope you get more budget.
I'd like to point out that previously I applied to work for the planning department. I never heard back from you guys, so I decided to get on the commission.
You're hired.
Okay, last comments, Commissioner Waldfogel.
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to.
All right, then I think we're done with that item. Thank you guys so much, and looking forward to seeing how everything goes. We have one last item, the minutes of February 10th. Do we have a motion on those minutes?
Motion to approve the minutes from February 10th?
Thank you. And second by Commissioners Alchek and Rosenblum. Let's take a quick vote on those. This is a motion to approve the minutes of February 10th. All those in favor? That passes unanimously. Thank you all so much. That concludes our meeting. 8:33.